Welcome to another episode of Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling, a collection of Asian American Pacific Islander social work voices. Hi, I'm Chris Lum,
And I'm Francis Joseph Gallego.
and we are AAPI social workers from the Bay Area. We're here to create a safe space to uplift AAPI social work voices, stories, and experiences across diverse communities and spaces.
Thank you, Chris. The bamboo ceiling refers to the invisible barriers that limit Asian American and Pacific Islander social workers from advancing into leadership roles. Despite high qualifications, AAPIs hold only 6% of senior positions in sectors like government and nonprofits, far below the workforce representation.
Today we'll be interviewing Carly Jones, and she is a sound healer, founder of Waves of Change Coalition, and a licensed clinical social worker in Virginia and California. Carly has a passion for integrative healing. Carly combines traditional psychotherapy theories with a trauma-informed anti-oppressive framework while also integrating frameworks like somatics and energy psychology to interventions like sound healing, therapy, Reiki, to support people in reconnecting with themselves and cultivating inner peace, safety, and oneness. Guided by the belief that healing is a lifelong journey, continuously be shaped and reshaped. She's here to walk alongside others with empathy, compassion, and authenticity, creating a safe space for transformation and self rediscovery.
Hi.
Hi, welcome, Carly.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We're so excited for you to be here. We wanted to know, can you share us a little bit about your personal journey? What are some experiences or people that influenced your path into social work and that inspired you to become the person you are today?
My path to social work, I never anticipated, it's crazy because I never anticipated being here. I went to college in Miami, thinking I was going to be a sports reporter, but I ended up, this is my cat.
Hi.
I ended up being a recreational therapist because communications like didn't drive with soccer schedule. And then I ended up working in a residential treatment facility as a recreational therapist, and then moved into adult inpatient. And while I was there, I was running two groups a day on the unit, in a inpatient psych unit. There's a lot of safety precautions, so you have to get very creative, right? Um, and so running a lot of like therapy groups, right? And trying to give like a recreation leisure like kind of flair. But in that feeling like I really wanted to connect with people more. And so I just was like, let me go for social work because it was the only thing that really supported the framework that I had been like learning and discovering through my work as a recreational therapist, like on an inpatient psych unit and working with kids and adolescents, right? Like seeing the whole person, seeing the systems in which we exist in, um, and just really wanting to understand how people got to this place, right? Because if you've ever worked in mental health, you worked in hospitals, whatever, like it does not just life doesn't discriminate against you. So being in these groups with such a variety of people and backgrounds was just really inspiring to me and really changed my life, I think, in a lot of ways of recognizing like how fragile life really is and how we're all, one crisis away really from like something life changing happening to us. Um, and then of course, my own life and my own story and, wanting to understand myself more, right? Can't pretend like that wasn't a part of it.
I know that Chris is going to ask that question later, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for, being so open and vulnerable to have some context and to share. Carly and I used to work together at Stanford Healthcare for a few years, and it's just I'm so amazed by Carly's level of just helping, patients with trauma. She worked at the ICU, and I'm just so grateful that she accepted our invitation to be here.
Yeah.
Chris, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So the next question is, what does it mean to identify as a mixed Asian Pacific Islander and work with communities of color and do social justice work in those various communities?
I think it's really important that I name that Francis was one of the first people to ever identify that I was a person of color. So coming in and meeting him and really feeling seen has been also very instrumental into my life. And so being mixed Asian, I didn't know where I fit, right? We talked about I'm from Virginia. There is actually kind of a large Filipino community here, but I'm Filipino in a way that we like bought our lumpia and brought them to like family gatherings and had like mashed potatoes and ham with it, right? So it's been very complicated, but it's always something I've really been attached to and felt drawn to more so. And I don't say this factually, but like feeling more so drawn to my Filipino heritage than like most of the people I feel like in my family. Um, and so looking at things from that social justice lens and recognizing that there are disparities from an early age. Like my grandmother was a war bride. She met my grandfather when he was in the Philippines during World War II, brought her to South Alabama, had five Asian mixed kids in South Alabama post World War II, right? So there's so much of discrimination and racism that's like rooted there, but was never spoken about, right? Because their dad was white, right? And so I think about the assimilation that my grandmother, we call her Granny, that she had to go through. Um, and I grew up in a mixed community, and I've always been very curious about people. And so working at Stanford and really hit it home, right? Because it's Virginia and California are different in the way we support people, right? And so being able to really speak to social disparities in the ICU, and I am a social worker that's thinking like down the line, right? They hated me in the ICU because they were like just trying to save someone's life and like get them to the next step. And I was like, you guys realize though that like my coworkers are gonna have to do something in a month from now, and this person has like zero safety net, social situation. What are we actually doing? And so, really being able to speak to people's lived experiences and call it out when if I find that when I working with people that don't have lived experiences or haven't been around diverse populations, they don't think that way. They don't think about the barriers that people experience. They don't think about how are they going to make a follow-up appointment when they don't have a cell phone, right? They don't think about what it really takes for someone to access services and care. And so being able to be an advocate in that way has been really important for me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'm just curious, was there any cultural aspects that you know um, you had to overcome adversity that also inspired you, also created that empathy, as how you are such a strong advocate in advocating for others? Is there anything in aspect that you your cultural identity, things you went through in terms of what you identify as?
I mean, I think just not feeling like I have a sense of belonging, right? Like not Filipino enough, but knowing that I was not white, right? Like I was not white. I keep going back to this like it's very young, I think in kindergarten and like one of those quintessential things of like what color crayon do I use?
Mm,
Like I don't want it to be too peachy, but I'm not
yes.
brown, but I'm not white. So like and I'm also an only child, right? And my parents separated when I was young. So even more division in the family. And my mom's family is white. They're Polish, right? So it's just very different. And I think my deep need to be seen
Mm.
makes me feel really strongly about seeing other people.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to say really thank you for sharing that because I remember just growing up and seeing like I had a nephew that looked differently, was like half Asian or half Chinese and half white, and they just it looked different, right, growing up, and you really speak to, right, that there is maybe a sense of kind of where do I fit in the family. So thank you.
Yeah. And I thank you also to piggyback on what Chris was saying, what you were saying. I think you bring up a very good point about the importance of belonging and the importance of creating safety and space, and also the importance of like what is included and what is not included, and why we need to create conversations such as this. I think a lot of times we use our lived experiences. You said so eloquently, the narrative and history of your grandmother and what she been through, right? And using that intergenerational trauma that your father went through, right, and your grandmother went through, in terms of kind of forming your own intergenerational wisdom. And that's one thing I always want to acknowledge about you, is because you've always been able to shape that. And I am so grateful for you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I know you touched this a little bit, but you worked at the ICU setting at Stanford Hospital, and you've also are working in the private practice. Chris mentioned your sound healing, which I hope you get a little bit about too, to tell people what it is. You know,
Mhm.
what is the difference and what is the similarity in working in both fields?
Well, that's a great question. I think the similarity is that we're always existing inside systems, right?
Mm,
I think the difference lies in what we can do in private practice versus what we can do in the hospital setting. And again, like hospital, you work in outpatient, I was working
mhm,
in the ICU, like it couldn't be more different, right?
mhm,
And then you have people working in medicine and I mean, like the traditional medicine floor. Um, so being very limited to what interventions we can do, and what the person needs, right? Like what a lot of times my work was with families, right? Because the patients are in the ICU, like they're very sick, they're intubated, they're sedated, like they're not interacting. So a lot of it is like the trauma work, the vicarious trauma with the family, but it's all time limited. In private practice, and I know this is maybe a little controversial too, but like you work with people for years,
mm,
right? Like,
mhm,
like I can't open up a like your trauma history and then be like, okay, well, have fun, with your next person who may or may not see you, who
mhm,
probably doesn't work in the way that I do, right?
mhm,
Has far more patience and bigger caseload than me because the responsibility and the role is different.
mhm,
But in private practice, really being able to sit with people and go like into the depths, like where did this come from? How is it showing up in your life? And how is it
mhm,
going to show up in your future?
mhm,
Rather than in the hospital, it's solution focused and time limited, and also very limited by the systems in which we're existing and what's available to us, right? They're gonna leave and we're never gonna ideally see them again. So the continuity of that therapeutic relationship isn't there to do like therapy work.
mhm,
I think really showing like the different hats social workers can wear, right? Like being really effective in the community setting, in a hospital setting, wearing a social work hat, and then still being effective as a clinician, a licensed therapist in private practice.
mhm. And you said it very eloquently too in the beginning, right? When you talked about like living in Miami, right, and working in residential treatment, right, is that you really showed the diversity of what social work is, right? I think a lot of times people may have stereotypes of social work like APS, CPS, mandated,
Hmm.
stuff like that, but then you really have done the gamut. You've worked in residential treatment, right? You've understand the complexities of crisis and mental health and inpatient. You've also worked in the ICU, but you
Mhm.
also understand not just the healthcare and the limitations, but the importance of advocacy, right? The importance of kind of looking outside your role. And now
Mhm.
working in sound healing, which I would like to learn more about, but also like the importance also of like the core of what social work is, which is social justice. I think a lot of times, like, Chris and I have had these conversations before, through the API Council North, is that, the core of social work really is about social justice, and you do embody it through the work that you're doing, be it through a private practice, right, through sound healing, or through, I think, advocating for our patients, because, like what you mentioned is like, the thinking about the patient throughout the whole process, right? It's not just about getting the checks done. It's about really seeing, okay, what's going to happen to the patient after they get discharged? How are we going to do all these different things? And I think that's so important that you are thinking beyond the box and empowering and challenging a system that doesn't sometimes doesn't work for our patients who really need more equity.
Mm.
But
Sorry.
tell us more about
Okay,
sound
okay, I'm back.
healing.
So sound healing is this really dope thing which we've been using for forever. And sorry, I'm long-winded. You're gonna get the really long version. When my granny was dying, I brought in a medium to try and connect with her because she's like Granny's like this great mystery. When we were in grad school, we had to do a genogram. I like really leaned into it and was like hoping my family was gonna tell me all the secrets, but like really nobody knows anything about her. So I was like hoping that this medium would help me, connect and learn more about her because I feel like my spirituality, my spiritual gifts comes from the Filipino side. And so that was confirmed with the medium. Like Granny did have some gifts. I think it runs like it's a lineage thing, so it feels very connected to use sound healing because people have been using sound in ceremony for forever, right? And I imagine, again, because I'm not super immersed in the culture, but I imagine it's been being used in the Philippines and in Filipino culture, right? And so the idea is that everything in the universe is made up of frequency. When we get out of frequency, that's where
Mm-hmm.
disease can come in, right? That's inflammation, sickness, what, whatever. And so we use instruments, Tibetan singing bowls, crystal singing bowls, tuning forks, gongs, drums, and we use the frequency to infiltrate the body, and what happens is the frequencies are entering the cells down to that cellular level. It actually can change the DNA of a cell, and you're really like healing from the inside out and restoring harmony and balance back to the body. So we're energetic beings that helps to move the energy out, whatever's stuck or blocked. We know that trauma lives in the body. We know that emotions are energy. We know that if we store our emotions in the body, that's when we have physiological symptoms. So being able to move that out and reestablish harmony in the body without having to talk, right? Like we don't have to go back and talk about, you don't have to share your most traumatic life event with me, right? I can work with the energy on your body and help kind of just dampen that down, right? And reset your nervous system and allow you to feel what it is when you are in a relaxed state, and really kind of tricking the brain, right? So the brain starts to entrain with the frequencies, moving us from the alpha like active state into a meditative state. And if you're like me, you have ADHD, like meditation is hard. It's hard to sit still and be quiet. And when you're using sounds, you lock in on the sounds, and it kind of, I was telling someone this today, like the frequencies are going to do what they do, whether you buy into it or not, right? So like even if your mind still gets like wanders a little bit, like I'm still able to manipulate those brain waves a bit. Um and again, the frequencies, the sounds are going to go into where they need to go.
Thank you for sharing about what sound healing was and also that ancestral connection you have I think it is true that our ancestors speak through us, and I remember having conversations with you about your granny and how important she was to your life. So thank you so much.
And maybe you kind of answered, but maybe you can say it again. But what what translated your um, passion, or not passion, but move from hospital, medical social work, to private practice, to including sound healing? Was there anything that particularly you felt um, that that yeah inspired you to kind of go that direction?
Yeah. So I found sound healing when I was in California, and I was like, why aren't we like pumping this through the ICU? Like, you're telling me that we can like chill the brain and reduce inflammation, and half of my patients are recovering from traumatic brain injuries, and we're just like letting them lay in bed, and you're telling me we could be like pumping specific frequencies like in their room. So that started, and then I had to abruptly move back home to Virginia. Um, and like medical social work in Virginia is not the same, right? And so I went back to the hospital that I was working at before moving to California, back when I was on the inpatient unit, and got probably the best job that I could have. It was in inpatient rehab. It was kind of separate from the rest of the hospital social work case management situation. But that's what we were doing. It was case management. I was making appointments. I was setting up like home health. They were in inpatient rehab. They had 3 hours of therapy a day. So they were getting PT, OT, and speech. So there wasn't time. There was space and opportunity for like a like clinical therapeutic, um, but there wasn't time, and they weren't in the mood for that after they had done 3 hours of therapy, and most of them were recovering from um strokes or some other serious illness. So I And then they started making changes within the hospital where I was going to be like lumped back into like the regular. I wasn't going to be separated and safe anymore, and I was like, there's no way. There is. And I got my license, and they were like, that's cute. No, you're not going to pay me anymore. Like, this is like, I'm like upper echelon now, and this means nothing to you. And so I was like, all right, I have to see my way out. And I felt like I had paid my dues. I didn't want to go back to the community. We have kind of a monopoly in our healthcare sector over here, so there's only like one hospital system you can work in. um didn't want to go to the community, needed to make money, and was like, so private practice seemed like my best bet. 'Cause I never intended on being a therapist. I even talked about it in supervision. Like, so I was going to work in the hospital forever.
Thanks for sharing that. We can skip to maybe question 5.
Okay. I thank you. I just also wanted to say, I think for a lot of us as social workers, we feel stuck in what we do, and I just wanted to commend you. I've known you for a long time, and you've always followed your dreams, and I remember when you first started building your business, how scary, right? But there's this quote I love: the upside of fear is liberation. And as you told us your story and how amazing it is that especially you as a woman of color, right? You, I think, as a social worker, I think like there's so many barriers we have right now, especially what's going on in the United States, and being able to have your accomplishments despite everything that's happening, be it in a personal level or a micro or macro level. And then we just wanted to really commend you for that because I think a lot of times, I think, especially in social work, we feel like we're stuck in these jobs, right? And we're stuck in these tight spots. But being able to understand, you know what, I am worth more. You basically told yourself that I am worth more. I'm worth more than this. You're not paying me my worth. I'm going to go and create my opportunities. So
Hmm.
congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you. It was, you said it very, very beautifully, but it was like, what I see and what I need and what I think people would benefit from doesn't exist. So I'm going to go create it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
because who knew private practice group settings are also very toxic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a difficult decision to make, but I think it can be very empowering because we're able to make the choices, that align with our values. And I could see you're
Mhm.
doing that. Our next question, it's about system inequities. In what ways are system inequities still impacting either the Asian Pacific Islander communities or BIPOC communities and clients? And where do you see opportunities for growth and change?
I mean, I think so. You just were talking about like macro and micro, and I think that just my role as a solo practice owner is to one, call out what you're experiencing and validating your experience, right? Like there are true barriers depending on your race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, whatever, right? And we also know that there's colorism in our own communities, right? So like breaking it down. But I think on a micro level, one, this idea of seeing people and creating this like you if you belong anywhere, you belong with me
Mm,
and empowering them, right? Like, yes, I have a few like black women as clients, right? And a lot of times it's just validating that experience and calling it back, right? And being like, well, you know that what systems and dynamics have shaped this current behavior that's impacting you, right? Like talking about navigating relationship and marriage. And it's like, well, what did your husband, who's a black man, learn about experiencing feelings and showing up as a husband, right? So I think at this stage of my career and my life, it's more on a micro level and just being able to name what isn't being said. Like
mm,
we all know it. We all people are living it, they're experiencing it, but who's calling it out for them?
mm, mm,
Who's really saying that this is what it is? Like your experience as a black woman is much different than mine.
mm,
Your husband's experience as a black man is different than somebody else's, right? And what did we have to learn in order to safely navigate, again,
mm,
systems approach, like to safely navigate these systems? What parts of us did we have to quiet? What parts of us did we have to hide? What parts of us did we have to mask and alter in order to be accepted in the communities that we exist in?
mm. That was very beautiful. I just wanted to say thank you. I mean, you talk about just really how do how you've done to just work through a system, right, that is entrenched, right, in white supremacy or entrenched in all these inequities, misogyny, transphobia, homophobia, right? But being able to also the importance of seeing our patients for who they are, our BIPOC patients for who they are, and helping them like look at the systems that don't work for them and decolonizing. You're basically decolonizing deconstructing and decolonizing these systems
Mhm.
with them. And I
Mhm.
think that's so powerful because I think especially as clinicians of color, you know, I think that's one thing we can do to help um, deconstruct white supremacy, deconstruct these systems that are not inequitable for us, especially when we're living in a world where, DEI is under attack, right? All these systems that are supposed to help us are under attack. So thank you so much for sharing
Yeah.
a little bit of what you do. I mean, it's
Yeah.
an honor to hear it.
I, and I always remind people, we talked a little bit about this like offline. I was like,
Yeah.
but we're in coastal Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Do not forget that we are in the South.
Mm,
Like, do not forget that those ideals hello, my cat, are rooted in so much of what we're experiencing. And I think that, again, it's 2026. We like to think that we've moved on from this. Virginia is like, you know, north, south.
mm-hmm.
But again, the patriarchy and dismantling,
Mm-hmm.
like decolonizing and just reminding people again, like, we you're existing in this imprint that's long before you, right? So
Mm,
don't forget what the underlying tones are
mm,
that we're experiencing.
yeah. And you bring it and you say the important thing again, right? I think that's why Chris and I wanted you on here because I think the perspective of someone who's lived in the West Coast, the East Coast, and the South, right? As a person of color, as someone mixed race. Like I think that is so important for our viewers to hear because it is different because sometimes when you're in the bubble of the Bay Area,
Oh
we
my God. Yeah.
things so different. I mean, you said it yourself, right? That being a hospital inpatient social worker at Stanford with its challenges, right, is very different than in Virginia, right? And
Hmm.
I think like being able to see beyond that, not everything is roses per se, or
Hmm.
that there's a lot of challenges in terms of like that's why DEI is so important, right? That's why deconstructing things are so important and all these different things. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yes.
Thanks. Um, yeah, so maybe, I mean, this might have answered this question kind of also, but our next question is, so you work both East and West Coast. What have been the biggest challenges and commonalities in doing social work in working with API and BIPOC communities?
You know, I'm really glad you asked this question because as I quickly reflect on like my caseload, right, I really have only had probably one Asian. No, that's a lie. I had a Chinese woman, and then I have a somebody who's Filipino, and that's really fun. There's a lot of intersectionality going on over there. But with this Chinese woman I was working with, it was a lot of naming the quiet thing out loud, right? Naming what is accepted traditionally versus where we're at in like modern day. The daughters were very assimilated. And I think on the East Coast and particularly in the South, we get a lot of black and white, right? And the Asian population isn't as heavily represented, which is why I say like when I'm thinking about my caseload, my Asian clients, it's actually a very small number. Where in California, that was much higher, right? And I think that because of that representation and because of that um like super mixed demographic of the Bay Area, I think it is maybe more normalized to come and seek therapy and seek help. We know that these communities are not the best at seeking help. It's still very stigmatized. Um, but I think that in Virginia, particularly in my area of Virginia, there's still very much communities and we live in those communities, right? Like Filipino people are still kicking it with Filipino people. Korean people are kicking it with Korean people. Chinese, like there's not a lot of um, mixing. And it makes me wonder if that again is because of, we're being in the South and like that's safe, right?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for sharing that insight. Thanks.
Yeah, and that's a good point about like, like how different communities view each other and all these different things,
Yeah.
and what you're
It
doing to bridge communities together.
Yeah. I think like in California when I first got to the Bay, it was like it's safe here. It's safe to be whoever you
Mm,
want to be, right?
mm-hmm,
And that is not the same. And I feel like in New York City, like in New York, it's also like you're safe to be and explore. But
mm-hmm,
and so talking about the East and the West Coast in that way, but then again, you're coming back down to the South and it's not safe to exist.
mm-hmm. Well, you bring up a good point, right? The history of Jim Crow, the history of segregation, right? The history of like how people view different ethnicities, sexual orientation, gender identities, right? And this issue of safety, right? Especially now with like what happened in Virginia with the taking away of voting rights by the Supreme Court, and how inequities constantly being practiced, and how it's different per state. So I think like how we can be seen from being identifying as different people, and how we can be seen equitably And it is true, like that, and that's how safety can be measured, is how our voices are heard. So I
Mhm.
really appreciate you bringing up that point. Chris, is it okay if I ask the self-care question because I
Yeah,
asked? Okay.
that's fine.
So how do you define? I know, as we know, this world is so intense. You open the news, it's like it can be so overwhelming. How do you define self-care in today's climate?
That's a great question. I think, well, I don't know how I would define it, but I would argue that it is not as glamorous,
Mm,
maybe. Like it's
mm,
not it's
mm,
in this climate, I think it's about doing less. I
mm,
think it's about resting. I think it's about recognize not overextending yourself. I think it's about, I talk about this a lot too, like recognizing how much input we're getting all the time, right? And since the a lot of what's going on in the media is so negative, like we are just being inundated with like heavy energy, right? And then we work as social workers, so it's like we're in it at work, it's out here. And so I think just really making sure you're tending to your energy levels and not overextending, because that's also like learned behavior. And my worth is my productivity
mhm,
is determines my worth, right?
mhm,
And Asian cultures, you're overextending, you're overachieving, you're high achieving. So this concept of doing less is very foreign and uncomfortable.
mhm,
And it feels like it's wrong, right? Because we have to be doing something, we have to be succeeding at something, we have to be practicing something. There is no downtime, right? Um, and so I think that that's how I'm defining self-care right now, is like taking time to rest,
mhm,
right? It's not, and clinicians have to. I do a CEU training on clinician self-care because it is in our ethics that we have to take care of ourselves. We're no good to anybody
mhm,
if we are burnt out, and I'm bringing my the burnt out, like shitty, annoyed version of myself to my work, right? So that's what, is really the last few years is recognizing my capacity for things is low. I don't do much outside of work. And I think at one point that probably felt bad, and I would have like been analyzing that and what does that mean? And, this deep rooted issue with belonging that I have, but
mhm,
recognizing that that's what I need. I need time to recharge. I
mhm.
need time to be away from it all. Um, and so making sure that we are not overextending ourselves in this climate, I think is my definition of self-care.
I love that. I love that.
It'll change in like 3 minutes, but for right now, that's what I'm gonna stick with.
No, I think that's so beautiful. It's like, it's like what we talked about before. You don't have to be perfect to be loved, right? And I think also is like being able to put things down that no longer serve you. And thank you for saying
Mhm,
that so eloquently.
mhm.
Yeah, really appreciate Carly. Just want to really thank you for taking the time to share your experience and wisdom,
Yeah.
and just yeah, it was just a very rich
Yes.
experience you spoke, and very important that you spoke all the things you spoke about. Before we end, is there anything that you share how you find joy in these challenging times that you like to do?
Honestly, like good connection. I've shifted into like doing things that feel meaningful, and have put down the things that, like if it doesn't feel good, then I don't want to do it. I mean, sometimes I find myself doing things and I'm like on my way and I'm like, man, I really don't want to be doing this. But part of me knows that it's like that I do. And so when I go and I do it and it feels good and I leave and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. But I'm sorry, I think I started rambling away from the question.
No,
No,
no.
you're doing a great job about how you find joy in these challenging
Yeah.
times, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you saw my cat. staying at home. Like my home is my happy space. My husband is here. I have many pets. I'm making sure that I'm staying connected with people that really do fill me up. And like, it's such an honor to be here. I can't express, I've told Francis 100 times, like what it means to be brought into this platform, to be seen as a person, as a woman of color, to be considered to be part of like the API community when, that has been so complicated for me. So, having these conversations is also very joyful for me. And anytime someone wants to talk about systems and oppression, like I
Yeah.
know it's counterintuitive, but like that does bring me joy.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, one of the many things you've done great at Stanford is challenging those systems. And I remember when you left, how sad I was. But I'm finally getting over it after 2 years.
I know. I
I am finally healing. But but
can't.
I think it just was such a loss for Stanford because I think, especially for our field, right? Especially
Mhm.
as clinicians of color. I think we have to have these honest and hard conversations
Mhm.
how we can not just empower each other, but empower the teams we work with, and why we have to ask those hard questions, and why systems need to be deconstructed because they don't serve everybody, they don't
Right,
serve the most privileged, and I'm so
right.
glad that you are doing what you are doing to help the communities that need it the most, and it's such a blessing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think of it as timing is really can be divine because I think about what I would have been doing if I was at Stanford over the last 3 years and like what that would have done to my soul and like my morale. And if I, how far do I toe the line? How much do I speak up? How much good trouble do
Mm-hmm.
you get into, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
then coming up against systems that are going to be like, yeah, we hear you and like cute, but like stop it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's true. And you're doing all this amazing. I mean, you were doing basically what the core of social work is, social justice, right? And also shows our
Mhm.
viewers that social justice comes in many forms. And you're also honoring your ancestors. You're also honoring your granny by doing the sound healing. It also shows the diversity of what it means to be Asian American Pacific Islander. It's not
Mhm.
measured by one identity, it's not measured by
Mhm.
one experience, it's measured by a diversity of experience. And that's what I knew when I met you. And I'm so glad that our audience gets to see what I see when I see you. And thank you so much. Mhm.
Thank you.
And yeah, thanks everyone to listening to the Breaking Bamboo Ceiling, a collection of AAPI social work voices presented by the NASW API Social Work Council North. And please stay tuned for our next episode, which will be interviewing more API social workers from diverse backgrounds and experiences. And
Thank
once
you.
again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.